Well, good morning. No, not good morning. Good afternoon. So, today I wanted to talk a bit about reading a book, and I'll explain why. I was listening to the radio this morning as I went to get the mail, and I was picking up at the post office box, and so I'm just listening to different things that other people are saying. And one of the topics of conversation that came on during the time I was listening was they were talking about how if we go to a search engine, most of the big search engines and such, and this is not actually a conversation about search engines, could be, but it's more about this little bit right here. Most of the search engines, for instance, if I look for coffee, then it will look for everything it knows about coffee and how it ranks, but it will also look for everything it knows about me and coffee, and it will curate a specific search engine results just for me. And so that means that if different people in different places look for something because of the history that we have on our machines, then we might get slightly different results. Now, if you've ever been really curious about something, you can kind of go through, and you can even go to other search engines. You can even use, and if you get really desperate, you can use that. You can change browsers. You can do all kinds of things to try to get new search results. But it was just intriguing to me to think about the fact that our own habits cause us to be surrounded with the same ideas and opinions day after day after day. And just so you know, William is over there taking a nap, so I don't want you to, if he suddenly wakes up and comes over here, it's okay. He's on the couch taking his nap. So, in this past week, we were in Texas for a wedding, and in the process of talking with different people at the wedding, I heard ideas that I was very familiar with. I also heard new ideas that I haven't really thought about up until now. I got to spend a little bit of time with my brother. I got to attend church with some of my mentors back in Bulverde, and it was a good, encouraging time. And so I find myself, this is true all the time. It was true in the middle of COVID. It was true at the very busy times. I'm finding myself constantly surrounded with people who think and who have opinions and who have thought about life, and some of these people who have lived and have experienced things that I may never experience. And I'm constantly amazed at how easy it is to talk about all kinds of things, and how many times I will have my own concept, my own thoughts, and someone else will have different thoughts. And so the idea that I could get myself, so think about it, this was the way I thought about it. If I get up every morning, go into the kitchen, and always make the same cup of coffee, then I drink that coffee while I do something. So some of us might, maybe first thing in the morning, maybe we read our Bible, maybe we grab our phones and we're scrolling and listening, or maybe we listen to something, but we do something. It's the routine. It's what we're accustomed to doing. And so after we do the same thing over and over and over again, day after day after day, then it gets to the point where all of these things that we're doing become very comfortable. We understand what we're going to hear. We expect to see certain things in Scripture or in our friends' lives if we're on social media, or if we're listening to the news. There's certain phrases that we're expecting to hear from our favorite news anchors. We just become very comfortable with it. And so if it's true then that I'm also creating, that my computer knows me, which it kind of is true the way technology works. And I'm saying this not just from a, it's more than, some of us when we hear this are like, oh no, this is so freaky, get it out of my life. And I understand that there's some concern there. But if you are a server, or a waitress or something at a local restaurant, and you have repeat customers. They come in, and after a while, you get the idea. Okay, if they come in the morning, they're going to order a cup of coffee. They don't want any creamer. They're going to order some eggs. They want them over medium. They're going to, and you start learning things about your customer. And so when they come in, at some point you might be able to say, do you want the usual? And they'll get it, and you'll get exactly what they want without them having to explain exactly what they want. And so it's called customer service. And when it happens to us, we like it in person. When it happens to us online, where the internet begins to know what we want before we have even said anything, it's freaky and it kind of scares us, because in person we enjoy and we like that better. So I'm not exactly sure where the jump or how my thought process fully went today, but I've been thinking about reading a lot, and so this was part of where it went. I'm thinking, if you are only hearing certain things, and you're only hearing them over and over again, the same things, at some point you may not realize anymore that you have and it's some kind of a bias, as there's a proper name for it, but if you think of a search engine bias or something, there's a certain bias now to what you hear. People are using the word echo chamber an awful lot recently for all kinds of things, political and theological and other, and so I don't want to say totally echo chamber, but we become very comfortable with what we're hearing. We keep hearing the same things. I do this a lot. I'll come in here, I'll sit down at my desk, and I will open up my music app and I will listen to the same song that I listened to yesterday. And sometimes for 6 weeks straight, I'll come in and I'll click on a song. Like a year ago, I read this book, Adorning the Dark by Andrew Peterson. And it took me a little while to get into it, but as I was reading it, it deals with the process of writing and the creative process. He talks about his singing songwriting. At one point, as I was reading along here, he had a spot where he said, I want you to put the book down and go listen to this song. Then he's like, no, to go read this poem. And so he's like, no, seriously, put the book down. So I put the book down. I go online. I find the poem he's talking about. It's not something he wrote. It was just a poem. I read the poem, and then I thought, wow, that's interesting. I picked the book up again, and he says something about a song that he wrote. And it was Carry the Fire by Andrew Peterson. I hadn't listened to the song, never heard it. But I'm reading, I put it down, I went and searched for it, found it on YouTube, listened to Carry the Fire by Andrew Peterson. I ended up listening to that song so many times all through last year, and even this year, as we were talking about what we're going to do this year, I went and listened to Carry the Fire. It has a special, specific meaning to me that I love listening to, and so it affirms me, it confirms me. And so if I'm thinking in terms of bias, I have a definite bias toward the message that's in that song, and I am encouraged by it, and it's dependable. And so I will listen to it over and over again because it speaks to me. And so I know this is true for us, and that's not entirely all bad. But sometimes you want to see if the way we're responding to life is really am I getting any new ideas? If you go on social media and every one of your friends say the exact same thing, while you might be comfortable, it gets really boring pretty fast because everyone's saying the same thing. And so you're like, come on, is one of you going to stop talking about politics and at least post what you ate for lunch? Okay, please don't. But that idea, can you just show me something different, because I'm seeing the same things over and over again? And so I was thinking about it. When I'm online, it's true that someone else could influence what shows up on the screen in front of me. And then if I'm on a big media site, someone else is curating those. And it's possible that they don't even care. Like, I thought it was so funny yesterday. I opened the news app on my phone, and my news app, hey Ron, thanks for joining from Topeka. My news app didn't tell me about what was happening in Washington, D.C. I had one story on the inauguration. But I had like 3 stories about coffee, and a bunch of stories about cars, and then a whole bunch of stories about cameras, DJI, and there were just GoPro and other things were on there. And I thought, my news app has begun to figure out what I click on. I click on things about coffee. I click on things about cars. I click, especially if I think I'm seeing something about a car that has a standard transmission. I'm like, I've been trying to find out when the last time was that they made a Chevy Suburban with a standard transmission. I haven't quite figured it out yet. I found some Tahoes from back in the 90s that were standard transmission, and if I could, anyway, I'm looking, not seriously looking, but I would like to have. There's for me as a man, there is some mystique and aura around a car that has 3 pedals, and I would like to find a Suburban that is dependable and has a standard transmission. So that's just one of those things. You don't have to send me links. I'm not serious totally. I just love looking at them. So I read articles about them. I'm trying to understand how it works. Someday I want to have a standard transmission Jeep with 4 doors. Probably my retirement vehicle, like what I'll drive those days. So I have this interest that I have where I enjoy cars, I enjoy coffee, I work a lot with cameras, and so my news app knows that, and so it feeds me things I want to know. I really don't like reading about politics online. There's so many different sites that are, in my mind, are not journalism anymore, but are just really a strong trying to push their ideas, and I already understand their ideas, and I don't necessarily agree, but I just get tired of it. Some of them that I might agree with, I still get tired of it because they never tell me just the news and journalism the way I'd like to hear it. They tell me what I should think about what had happened. And so I get tired of those. So my phone kind of knows that and is feeding me things I want. So it may not make sense in the way I am thinking today, but thinking about reading books, one of the things, when I read a book, there is nobody curating that book. Like when I read through Andrew Peterson's book about Adorning the Dark, Thoughts on Community Calling and the Mystery of Making, I remember reading through the first chapter, Bach's Secret Weapon. And then I was getting a little frustrated with Andrew, and I waded into the second chapter in the beginning, and I kept being frustrated with Andrew. I got to chapter 3, and I'm like, a good friend gave me this and said I'd enjoy it. And so I'm reading it, right? I want to know. Someone I respect gave me a book. I want to know what it's about. So I'm reading it. And I keep going, and I keep going, and I'm frustrated. Like, it's so myopic and so, I don't know, and then suddenly somewhere around chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in the middle of the book, things came in focus, and I understood why he was writing the way he was writing. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. But see, I gave myself over to be willing to read a book, and even when I disagreed with the guy, I kept reading. I wasn't shielded from the bias of his opinion or his thoughts. I had to read it. And so what I thought I didn't agree with began addressing a deep question I already had that I didn't realize that's what he was talking about at first. And it took me a while. So books are like that. Nobody's there to protect you. Like, here's a book. If I can get to it. This book, The Life of D.L. Moody, by his son. So this is an old version of the book, which, by the way, I love the opening to this book here in the front, what's written here in the cover plate. Oh, hey, Levi, thanks for joining from North Dakota. So this is about D.L. Moody, and he says, "Someday you will read in the papers that D.L. Moody of East Northfield is dead. Don't you believe a word of it. At that moment I shall be more alive than I am now. I shall have gone up higher, that is all. Out of this old clay tenement into a house that is immortal, a body that death cannot touch, that sin cannot taint, a body fashioned like unto his glorious body. I was born of the flesh in 1837. I was born of the Spirit in 1856. That which is born of the flesh may die. That which is born of the Spirit will live forever. I love that opening to this biography, or they call it the autobiography of D.L. Moody. And I've read this book multiple times for the past 20, 30 years, and I've been challenged by D.L. Moody. He lived in a different century than I did. And hey, Andrew, Ohio, thank you for joining. And so I've been challenged by the way he lived his life and the way he saw the church, the way he saw evangelism, the way he saw politics. He was involved in very many of the very same things I'm involved in. He was concerned what was happening in Washington. He was concerned what was happening in the church. He was concerned what was going on around him. And when I read that book, it isn't that I 100% am want to be a clone of D.L. Moody, but I'm challenged by it. D.L. Moody, one of the big things he did in his life, he worked with the Sunday school movement that was happening at the time, and he helped establish the national, the National Sunday School organization that was publishing a lot of the curriculum. I'm here at a day and age where I'm looking at our families and our churches that, we don't need Sunday school now. That might have been good in the 1800s, but what we really need right now is we need fathers who will lead their children and their families, and we need to have people doing this at home. And so I'm a pastor of a church where we don't even have Sunday school, because I'm trying to encourage families to do the teaching of the training of their children at home. So it's interesting that here I have the life of D.L. Moody, totally challenged and encouraged by the guy, but I don't agree 100% with him. But when I read his book, there's nobody there to shield me from that bias. Just serves it all up. I read the whole thing. I make my own decisions and opinions about it. It's awesome. When we read something, it's one of the quickest ways for us to kind of venture outside of our circle. And so if your computer and your phone is beginning to only serve up the things that the algorithm or whatever, knows that you will like, and you want to break past that, one easy way to do it is go read a book. And if you get stuck on one, this can happen. You read a Louis Lamar book, and you're like, I just love it. Next thing you know, you've got a shelf of, I don't even know how many there are. I've seen my friends with the whole collection. It seems like there's hundreds of them, of Louis Lamar, Westerns. And some, you read one of them, you'll love it, so you read another one. I read Harold Bell Wright's books. Love them. Bought every one I could find. But there's only, I think, a dozen or less. And so I read all those. Each one's a little bit different, but it's thoughts from him. I have some disagreements with him, but I'm also challenged by him. So I love reading those books. I don't think we should get stuck reading only one person's books. That's not quite what I'm wanting to encourage you. I want you to read books and think about life. Like right now, I read a lot of books throughout the year. A long time ago, years ago, I read this book it's not that old of a book. It's Start by John Acuff. It's one of those, it says punch fear in the face, escape average, do work that matters. It's all of the buzz, the key words, things that a lot of us want to do. It really falls under the idea of a self-help kind of inspirational kind of book. I don't read a lot of these, but every so often I do. This one, when I read it, I needed the message that John Acuff was sharing in it. It was awesome. It encouraged me. Today, I am a pastor. I'm bivocational. I'm a pastor, and I'm a filmmaker. I was in the middle of that struggle at the time. I was trivocational, if you will, at the time. I'm now bivocational. And so it caused me to really rethink the way I was approaching the other vocation, filmmaking, and it helped me live more intentionally. So that was a good book. Over Christmas, Stacy and I watched the movie. It's called The Man Who Invented Christmas, and it's kind of a misleading title, but it's a story about Charles Dickens, who wrote The Christmas Carol, A Christmas Carol. And I've always enjoyed A Christmas Carol. I've enjoyed other things about Dickens, or by Dickens. But as we were watching it that time, I really felt something in the character that was portrayed in the movie. I felt a kinship with him. Now, I'm not quite as crazy as he was portrayed to be, where he's yelling and throwing stuff in his study in the middle of the night. I'm not quite that extreme, but there are times in the writing process, in the creative process, where where I felt what they were portraying. There was enough so that I told Stacy, I said, this thing feels a little too close to home. And she's like, yeah, it is a little too close to home for where. But in reading it and thinking about it, I got so curious about some other aspects of Dickens' life, and so I started looking. And there are people who wrote books about it more recently. I I know how we think in this day and age, so I'm looking for someone who wrote Thinking Differently. So I found this one written by a friend of Dickens, volume 1 and 2, The Life of Charles Dickens by John Forster. And so I was reading this to understand a little bit more about what was going on in Dickens' life. Absolutely fascinating. And so it helped me understand better how his life impacted his storytelling. There are things about his life that just absolutely were heart-wrenching when I was reading it and thinking it and putting myself in his shoes. And so, he was one of those men who got famous, but then also was not satisfied and ended up having affairs and other things. And it was a problem. It was not right. And so I'm reading it going, oh, how can this happen? What is he doing? So and Ron, you said you enjoy reading books that you'll be in disagreement with your stance just because it makes you dig in. It's true. When you read something from a different perspective, you go, wait a minute. Is that what this is about? And you start thinking, and sometimes your thinking has been flawed. I find this all the time, where I've been thinking the same thought the same way for so long that I haven't ever been challenged, and I haven't even allowed myself to be challenged. And it reminds me, we a lot of times we blame older folks of being narrow-minded. Well, part of it is just, and I see this especially in the homeschool community, where you'll have someone, maybe it's a homeschool mom, and she had a row of children, and so she was teaching them. And so, if she's teaching them all through 12th grade, and she has enough children, she can be a teaching mode for 20 plus years that she's teaching. And what'll happen is, with the first child, you're kind of going along and you're making discoveries, and it's fun and exciting and fresh. And then you go with the second child and you're like, oh yeah, we did this last time. And the third one, oh yeah, okay, this again. Okay, I wonder if I can say this in a way that doesn't bore me quite as much. And you get down there toward, the 7th and 8th and 9th child, and it's just like, here's the facts, here's how it works. Just, if you want a good grade, study this, and here's the answers. And if anyone asks a question, there's the novelty of exploring and learning is kind of gone away, and now it's just, here's the truth, I've already said it, I already know it, over and over and over again. And something is lost. And so once the children are gone, there's often a crisis point that, husbands and wives then have to really weather well, because for so long she was an expert, or, husband and wife, and she just knows these are the answers. If we go look up in the history books, this is what we're going to find, so here's the answer, go with it. But something's lost in the transition. And so in the same way, when we have believed something for so long, and we don't ever allow ourselves to be examined, we never allow ourselves to be questioned, it can really become a painful thing. And so I would challenge you, no matter how old or young you are, find something to read. Speaking about youth, the other day when we were in Texas, one of my, Jerry Wise gave us a few children's books, and I was reading this children's book. It's a poem, the first book of poetry, and I thought this poem by A.A. Milne perfectly captures that one stage of childhood. It's called Forgiven, and it's about this black beetle. So I'm going to read it for you because I'm talking about reading. I found a little beetle, so that Beetle was his name, and I called him Alexander, and he answered just the same. I put him in a matchbox, and I kept him all the day. And Nanny let my beetle out. Yes, Nanny let my beetle out. She went and let my beetle out, and Beetle ran away. She said she didn't mean it, and I never said she did. She said she wanted matches, and she just took off the lid. She said that she was sorry, but it's difficult to catch an excited sort of beetle if you've mistaken for a match. She said that she was sorry, and I really mustn't mind, as there's lots and lots of beetles, which she's certain we can find, if we looked about the garden for the holes where beetles hid, and we'd get another matchbox and write Beetle on the lid. We went to all the places which a beetle might be near, and we made the sorts of noises which a beetle likes to hear. and I saw a kind of something, and I gave a sort of shout, a beetle house, and Alexander Beetle coming out. It was Alexander Beetle, I'm as certain as can be, and he had a sort of look as if he thought it must be me. And he had a sort of look as if he thought he ought to say, I'm very, very sorry that I tried to run away. And Nanny's very sorry, too, for you know what she did. And she's writing Alexander very blackly on the lid. So Nan and me are friends because it's difficult to catch an excited Alexander you've mistaken for a match. Isn't that delightful? I thought it was so... It just captures that certain age of boyhood, and I loved it. And so I read that. It's a first book of poetry. It's for children, but I read that and it's refreshing. I haven't thought about beetles in that way for a very long time. There was a day when I had a beetle and I used a little string and tied it on his leg and tied him to the front porch post so that he wouldn't go too far away, and I had my pet beetle, and I even named him. I don't remember what it was. I just remember we used to name our beetles and had him on the front porch. And June bugs. June bugs were more fun because they would try to fly away, but you'd have them tethered so they could just fly as far as the string went. See, I was a little boy once. So it's good for myself to be, at times, challenged by someone else's thought, whether it's a child thought, like this book. This is not a child thought. This is the history of the Christian church. And it's written by George Park Fisher, D.D., LL.D., Titus Street Professor of Ecclesiastical History in Yale University. And he wrote it about 100 years ago. I've been reading it to see what his thoughts are on church history. And it's been very fascinating for me to read. Like, he doesn't write like a church history professor of 2020. He thinks he's dealing with different problems at that time. Very interesting. And so I find it so helpful for me to be able to read different things. And hey, Teresa, you're watching from Colorado. That's awesome. I'm glad that I have friends in Colorado too. So we're, how do we take care of all this? And I think of how life-changing reading or listening can be. Here's, one of my favorite things to read. I love this scripture. John 14, it says, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And where I go you know, and the way you know." Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way?" Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." I've read that so many times. Do you know that there's different times when, in different season of life, I will have something going on, and I will read that, and something else will stand out. At the wedding on Saturday, when I was sharing, I read that as the text. And the part that stood out to me so clearly then was something else. Back in the 80s, my in-laws, Jim and Ann Jones, they discovered this new song, which was fairly new at the time, by Bill and Gloria Gaither. It's "Because He Lives." Many of you are familiar with it. It had a verse in it that said, "How sweet to hold a newborn baby and feel the pride and joy he gives. But greater still, the calm assurance, this child can face uncertain days because he lives." That phrase for them caught them right where they were. They had gotten into a way of thinking with everything they were hearing around them. They were concerned about where the country was, the direction of what was happening. They had heard, they were seeing the Cold War playing out, things like that were happening. And they were really concerned. What ought we to do? And specifically, should we have any more children? That's what they were thinking. If we have more children, they're going to have to grow up in this world. And so they went ahead, and because of this song, we're really encouraged. They're like, you know what? We can face uncertain days because he lives. So someone else's words that someone else wrote encouraged them. And this could happen to you by reading a book or listening to music. So I encourage you, read books, listen to music. And what happened next was they discovered they were pregnant with Stacy, my wife. And Now, when they look back over these last 30 something years, and they look back at how, or almost 40 years, when they were concerned about whether they should have any more children, they look at all the grandchildren, and they see what all the children are doing, they see what all the grandchildren are doing, and it was from this vantage point, it's a no-brainer. We should have children and train them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and we shouldn't be afraid. But at the time, it was a serious question. And this is what books can do for us. This is ideas, words, songs. Is if you get stuck in a certain way of thinking, it might control the way you act. But if you are able to hear other words, other ideas, it can give you a new perspective that years later you'll look back and say, wow, when I read that, that was life-changing. Now, maybe a poem about a beetle in a matchbox might not be life-changing, but it could be. There's so many ways that we're impacted by words and stories. So I personally don't like the idea that someone is curating for me exactly what I'll hear and I won't hear everything else. I like the idea that I can get new ideas. I like the idea that my thinking can be challenged. I like the idea that I can be fine-tuned. So I keep reading. I keep reading history and the scriptures and familiar books and new books. People I agree with, people I disagree with. I have lots of books. Well, you can see I have books over here, I have books over there. I have lots of books. Some of them I absolutely love. With every sentence that goes by, I'm like, that's awesome. Others, I'm like, I don't think they're quite right. But that's good, and I welcome it. So that's my thought for today. Go read a book, listen to a song, let your thinking be challenged, and see if you can, if there's something that you can do that can make you think more clearly so that you don't get stuck in the same way of thinking time after time. That's all for today. Blessings. See you next time.